Okay, Jason, tee me up and tell me how a bank is going to decide how I should live my life.
Worldbank.org has
Bank.
a report for revealing observations from the New State of Economic Inclusion Report 2021.
Mm-hmm.
So governments and developed partners have long used economic inclusion programs as part of their anti-poverty efforts. These interventions are key to helping the poorest and vulnerable people escape the cycle of poverty by boosting their incomes and assets and helping them gain productive employment and build sustainable livelihoods.
Can we just be clear? You don't put your banks there because you don't want to underwrite people there. Hands down. You don't want to invest in infrastructure in these people. Their own governments do not want to invest in them. So what is some report going to do for telling countries how to operate and invest in their people? If they haven't chose to do it in the first place, they're not going to do it. If the people haven't demanded it of their government for that infrastructure or even work for themselves to go do it, the World Bank cannot have any effectuated thing with what's going on here, especially with some little report that they're going to send out to everybody. You think someone gives a shit in Sudan? And I mean this honestly, about this report? Do you think some normal person in Sudan is going to read this and be like, oh, thank God for that World Bank report that came out. This is going to change everything for us.
Yeah, and they said this, however, there lacks an organized effort to gather evidence of impact, discussions of FSC costs and trade-offs and feasibility to scale up such programs at the global level.
Why?
What is gather evidence?
Yeah, gather evidence is that data.
Right.
They have not actually spoken to the poorest of the poor. They have not looked at these vulnerable groups and had these discussions. They get their data from these other companies out there. They don't actually get it directly from those source of people that they're referring to and writing about in this article. How can your data that you fundamentally think is going to change the infrastructure and the lives of these poorest and most vulnerable people, if you've never even had a conversation with them, if you've never acquired the data from them directly? And think about this in the context. If you really did want the data and you want to put your money where your mouth is, World Bank, buy the data from them. Economically uplift these people while getting the data that you need to enrich a report that actually has something quite valuable in it.
Yeah, and we know that can be done through TARTLE.
Absolutely, it can be done through TARTLE.
And this is what I like. It said this: a systematic review of economic inclusion programs around the world and help shed light on how countries can further build on investments in social protection, jobs and livelihood, and financial inclusion to help the poorest transition to livelihoods and build a future for themselves. I like the part of build a future for themselves.
Love that.
Because that's taking 100%
That's the
responsibility.
responsibility. Correct. Yeah, it's awesome.
But whenever I'm coming in as a separate identity and coming into some place and saying, I mean, we've had this problem multiple times in the past. It has never worked out well.
It's never worked out well.
And we go into a country and say, this is how you should build. That's where, instead of asking the people, we're telling them, going against their free will and saying.
Do you think they're going to listen to your report then?
No.
If you're telling them this is how they should live? Of course not. You're not meeting them where they are. So keep going here. They got another.
Yeah, the report examines economic inclusion programs and data from 100 organizations that have launched 219 economic inclusion programs in 75 countries around the world.
Okay, first of all, there's over 195 recognized countries. There's like 7.5 billion people. And your entire report that you think is going to sum up economic inclusion is coming from 100 organizations. Think about the ratio of 100 organizations to 7.5 billion people.
And only 75 countries.
And only 75 countries, not the full gambit of like 195.
Yeah, because I mean, in those 75 countries, if you have China, India, United States, Canada, UK, Europe, now your data's off.
Yeah, and first of all, of course we're going to have NGOs. Okay? Of course we're going to have not-for-profits.
Yes.
Look at us. You're talking about more economically developed nations already. Of course they're going to have more inclusion programs. But you can't apply the scale of inclusion in developed areas to places that actually don't have any sort of scale of inclusion, right? And you cannot apply your idea of how you think these people should be included or how to rate the amount of inclusion they're receiving economically if you have not directly spoken with them. It's their perspective of what their poorness and vulnerability is, not for you to decide for them how vulnerable they are.
Yeah, and they said the most stubborn challenges in development, transforming the economic lives of the extreme poor and vulnerable. And this is what I want. And I want to play just exactly what you said and us carry that thought. whenever I'm saying it is my responsibility to transform, that's a big word, transform.
It's a big word.
And then my judgment of what is poor and what is vulnerable.
I could be so poor and have zero vulnerability. I could be the happiest person on the face of the planet. I could have a collective of people in my country, a majority of us, that albeit are poor but have no vulnerability. If anything, they're probably more stable because they're not tied into the economic system.
That's what I'm getting into, because they don't have social media and they don't have Netflix and they don't have, the internet, so they're not, they're poor.
Yeah.
They don't have cell phones, so they're poor. As technology judge,
how do you define what poor is?
Yeah, exactly.
Your idea of poor is a completely different concept to those people. And your idea of poor is reliant on 100 organizations. You have not spoken to the people that actually truly live there. You've not spoken to those ones that are poor. You've not economically included them because you have not, frankly, purchased the data from them. You have not spoken to them. You have not met them where they are. So your limited insight and understanding into the truth is non-existent. The value of this report is valueless. There's nothing there.
I just hate this imperialistic idea of where we feel like we have the answers.
It's imperialism.
And we need to give those answers to others, and it has to be done this way. It's the same thing that when we went in Japan after World War II. And we created.
I can think of so many examples.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many examples. We could go. We could go into what we did in the rainforest. Remember the Henry Ford thing?
Of course.
Where he made that.
I want to put the
rubber
factories, actually in the rainforest, in the jungles.
And he made people
like Ford cities.
Yeah, he made them do like polka dancing, and they couldn't drink or smoke.
It was just not. It's like this idea that you need to reform people instead of allowing them the free will and choice to reform themselves. But then you say you have this data that will define who they are. You've never asked them for their own definition. Imagine if someone showed up and told you who you were and said, oh, well, that's it. Imagine if I came to your company, whatever it might be, and said, this is who you are.
Right.
Not who you say it to the public. We're going to define it for you.
It's even worse than that, because saying you don't know who you are, and it is our responsibility to define.
The report's insulting.
Yeah.
It's hypocritical. It's insulting. And it's not economically alleviating anything. It's just like this fart. It's just this emptiness. There's nothing. It carries no weight. There's no value. There's no. Is there a comment in there in this report from somebody?
They say this though. Common among all these economic inclusion programs is a central hypothesis. People who are extremely poor and vulnerable face multiple constraints when encountering poverty traps. A multidimensional response is required, and so economic inclusion programs include a bundle of coordinated multidimensional. Are you ready for this word? Listen, I want everybody to listen. A program. So there's a program, including a bundle of coordinated multidimensional interventions.
You're intervening. You're going to step in to my life, and you're going to intervene without even my consent or my say or understanding. If you read that statement, that English written statement right there from that report to all of the poorest countries, they would not know what the hell you are saying to them. It is gibberish. You're practically lying to them. It doesn't make any sense. It is of no value to their life. But you want to intervene on their lives? This sort of intervention, you know what those words are to me? That reminds me of war. Mm-hmm. We need to intervene over here in this conflict.
I view it as a very self word.
Yeah, it's like this like weird like selfish thing. This like sense of control. It's almost like they're not at a state where they can elevate themselves. We got to do it for them, right? You're not good enough?
But listen to this. This is even worse. 4 key observations emerged from this report to help show the path forward. So here's the path forward. Governments around the world are increasingly leading the scale up of economic inclusion interventions. Government-led programs featured in the SI report cover 95% of the beneficiaries. As these programs evolve, they tend to build on large-scale anti-poverty programs, often already focused on safety nets, livelihood and jobs, and financial inclusion efforts. Common interventions include a combination of cash or in-kind transfers, skills training or coaching, access to finance, and linkage to market support. So they said governments around the world are increasingly leading the scale up of economic inclusion interventions. So their basis is that government is the answer,
Yeah.
not the people.
Yeah. I'm not saying that you and I are not just sitting here saying, we're radicalist anti-government. The thing is, this thought, this intervention idea has no balance.
But where does human rights play into government?
There's
because we have human rights as number 3 on our big 7, and number 6 is government and corporate transparency. So, and the government and corporations are basically one, if you really kind of want to.
Yeah, there's no separation. Separation of church and state.
I think who was it said that the United States was a corporation? It was in the late 1800s. One of our presidents.
You can literally just check the founding documents and stuff. It's literally a corporation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So whenever we look at this government being the answer, because they're poor and they don't know better,
Governments are supposed
so we must lord over.
Governments are supposed to represent people, are they not?
Service to others.
Yeah, that's what it's supposed to be. And right here is just saying, no, the government needs to decide for the people because they're not doing it for themselves. And what is, it's such an easy thing to do, Jason, would have been to just buy data, purchase it from these individuals directly, immediately economically uplift them without some program they have to put money into, get it set up, create a business out of it, have it do all this paperwork. You have all the economic waste in doing something like that. You could have paid them directly, been done with it, got your data, and then met the people where they were. And then you can actually write a paper or report that effectively communicates to a business and a government and to a person. But this right now, what is being read to me, is not something that is an effective communication of truth.
Right.
It's very biased. It's so one-sided. It's so there's no respect of the free will of people, right? Or actually looking at them with all the rights that they have.
Well, when you look at the report and you hear where they talk about egalitarianism and they talk about, everybody having access to, training, coaching, and finances and, linkages to market support, those all sound good, but this is a Trojan horse.
Of course, it's a Trojan horse. You're implanting this weird centralized government World Bank infrastructure within all these countries.
And that's going to be the answer to poverty.
That's not the answer. The question is going to those people and say, well, why are you poor? Do you want to work? Do you work a lot? What is your perspective of why you have not received opportunity? Not one of those things tells me about the mindset or the choice of these people.
Maybe they love living in the rainforest and they want to live in the rainforest and they don't want to work and they don't want to chop the rainforest down and they're happy being tribes.
Some people choose to be homeless. Some people choose to live in caves.
Yeah.
Some people choose to seclude themselves. Some people want to sell all their things. Some people want to be minimalists.
Why do we have to come in there, put suits and ties on them and have them work a 9-to-5 job
and say, now
chop
you're
down
included?
The rainforest? Yeah.
Now you're included.
Now you're part of the global
to
program.
Society. Mm-hmm. Come on. That's just not, it's not it. That's not it. It's a miss. This was a fire and a big miss. That's what I'm looking at here. Okay. This report, lame. LAME. Does not work for me. Does not work for anyone.
Yeah. And I want to say this, and we'll close on this. They say women are being prioritized in economic inclusion interventions. And I love that.
Awesome.
And I think that's
awesome.
Great. But like I said before, whenever you begin to say the government is not the answer for egalitarianism.
No, if you're talking about egalitarianism, this is like a people to people thing.
Mm-hmm.
This is a respect of the rights. Like I have my rights, you have your rights, and I'm going to respect that. We have human rights together. That's going to change the perspective here.
Yeah. And I think number 2 on our big 7, it's funny how they all play and interlink with each other. Educational access changes that.
Of course it does.
Whenever you begin to educate and then people have this hunger for knowledge, and then they begin to see outside of their, little 50-mile radius that they walked in.
Nice.
You know what I mean? And so then they begin to see other perspectives. Now they have choices.
Yes. Awesome.
And that's our responsibility, whether it's a government, whether it's the World Bank, whoever it is our responsibility to give people choices.
That is what we need.
That's when we lead right.
That's when you respect human rights. And you're putting your money where your mouth is. But this report and a bunch of money that was spent on it, collecting this data from 100 organizations that apparently represent all of the poorest people in the world when it's only 75 countries, none of this carries any weight. Useless. Absolutely useless.